This is the read aloud for Chapter 1, Lesson 3. Essential question is what makes a culture unique? North American cultures. As in Mexico, Central America, and South America, advanced cultures develop in parts of North America that are now the United States, long before Europeans arrived in the 1500s. Among these cultures were the Adena, Hopewell, Mississippians, and the central and eastern regions of the present-day United States. The Hohokam and the ancient Puebloans emerged in the southwest regions. The Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures. In Central and Eastern North America, prehistoric Native Americans built thousands of earthen mounds or earthworks. The earthworks were not created by a single group, but by many different people. Scientists have sometimes referred to these different people together as the mound builders. We learned about that in science. The ancient earthworks take many different forms. One famous example is the shape of a serpent. Some resembled the pyramids of the Maya and the Aztec. Some contained burial chambers, and others were topped with temples. This seems to indicate that cultures of Mexico and Central America, such as the Maya and Aztec, had influenced these cultures. Does that make sense? So the people from before are now influencing the later people to come. Archaeologists have classified these earthwork building cultures into three groups: the Adena, Hopewell, and the Mississippian cultures. Modern day scientists name the groups. No one knows what these early people called themselves. The Adena were hunters and gatherers who lived in the river valley from the 1800s BC to AD 100. The Hopewell people came later between 200 BC and 500. The Hopewell were farmers and traders who built huge burial earthworks in the shapes of birds, bears, and snakes. Within these earthworks, archaeologists have discovered fresh water pearls, shells, cloth, and copper. These finds indicate that the Hopewell trade network extended for hundreds of miles. Pretty cool. They have the map on the bottom. It's showing you the sites of each of them, where they came from. And then I'm sure some of this information that we just read will be in our questions. Sometime after AD 900, a people now called the Mississippians built the largest known earthworks complex in present-day Illinois, later named Cahokia. The complex might have had 20,000 or more residents, surrounded by farms and settlements. Cahokia became the center of Mississippian culture. Cahokia appears to have resembled the ancient cities of Mexico. A great pyramid-shaped earthwork dominated Cahokia, known as Monk's Mound. It rose nearly 100 feet. I probably pronounced that wrong, so forgive me. A temple crowned the summit of Monk's Mound. A legend of the Nachex people, descendants of the Mississippians, hints of a direct link to Mexico. So the primary source says, before we come into this land, we lived yonder, under the sun. The speaker pointed towards Mexico. Our entire nation extended along the Great Water, which was the Gulf of Mexico, where this great river, the River St. Louis, loses itself. The Hohokam, from about AD 200 to AD 1400, the Hohokam culture flourished in the dry, hot desert in present-day Arizona. As the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures, the name Hohokam was given to the culture in modern times. As desert dwellers, the Hohokam were experts at maximizing their few sources of water. They irrigated, which means brought water to their corn, cotton, and other crops, by digging hundreds of miles of channels. So it's kind of like creating their own little river system. The Hohokam also produced pottery, carved stone, and etched shells with acid. The shells serve as evidence of trade with coastal people. The ancient Puebloans. The Four Corners is the place where the modern-day states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. It was in this region that the ancient Puebloans lived at about the same time as the Hohokam, about AD 1 to AD 1300. In the past, these people were called the Anasazi, But descendants of the ancient Puebloans disliked that name. The ancient Puebloans built great stone dwellings that Spanish explorers later called pueblos or villages. Visitors to New Mexico today can still see one of the most spectacular of these ancient settlements. Pueblo Bonito, the huge structure that was at least 4 stories high and had hundreds of rooms. Around Pueblo Bonito, archaeologists have found traces of a complex network of roads. These roads link the Puebloans with other villages. They suggest that Pueblo Bonito may have been a center for trade or religion. So very cool to be living in these pictures on the top and the bottom. Imagine if your home or your city looked like that, right in the cliffs of the mountains. Very exciting. The ancient Puebloans also built dwellings in the walls of steep cliffs. Cliff dwellings were easy to defend and offered protection from winter weather. One of the large cliff dwellings is the Mesa Verde in Colorado. This ancient complex structure was home to several thousands of people. The ancient Puebloans began leaving their pueblos and cliff dwellings of smaller communities in about 1300. They might have abandoned their large villages when drought, which is a long period of little rainfall, destroyed their crops. So they think that's why they left, because they didn't have water for their crops, and then they started downsizing and making individual homes. The Native Americans around 1492, does that year sound familiar? While the Hohokam, ancient Puebloans, and the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian civilizations eventually faded away, other Native American cultures arose to take their place. In the time before European arrival in the 1400s, many unique societies flourished throughout North America. Within different regions, different groups shared common features. These features reflected the conditions within each region. The northern peoples, which is what our chapter is about, a people called the Inuit, settled the frigid lands at the northernmost part of the North America, near the Arctic Ocean. Some scientists believe the Inuit were the last migrants to come from Asia to North America. The Inuit may have originally come from the Asian region of Siberia, bringing with them the skills needed to survive the cold climate. In the winter, the Inuit built igloos, low-lying structures of snow blocks, which protected them from severe weather. The Inuit were skilled hunters and fishers. In the coastal waters, they hunted whales, seals, and walruses in small skin-covered boats called kayaks. I do not know how you hunt a whale in a kayak. Unbelievable. On land in the far north, the Inuit made warm, waterproof clothing from caribou skins and seal skins. They burned seal oil in lamps. Very crazy. Now we have the Western people. The western coast of North America has a mostly mild climate and dependable food sources. Such favorable conditions helped many Native Americans in this region thrive. The Tlingit, which we will read about when we read Spirit Bear, Haida, and the Chinook lived in the northwestern coast of North America in what is now Canada, southern Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. The cultures of the region depend on the forest and the sea for food and materials needed for living. Forests provided food for houses and canoes, as well as tree bark for making baskets and clothing. The rivers and coastal waters were filled with salmon, a main food source. Native Americans preserved salmon by smoking it over fires. The area between the Cascade Mountains and the Rocky Mountains is known as the Plateau region. We learned about plateaus earlier. High land that's flat. There, the Nez Perce, and Yakima people also depended on the land, fishing the rivers, hunting deer in forests, and gathering roots and berries. The Native Americans of the Plateau region lived in earthen houses. Present-day California was home to a great variety of cultures. Along the northern coast, Native Americans fished for their food. In the Central Valley of California, the Pomo gathered acorns and pounded them into flour. In the more barren southern deserts, nomadic groups collected roots and seeds. Between the Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains lies the Great Basin region. There, the soil was too hard and rocky for farming. This meant that people such as the Ute and the Shoshone had to travel in search of food. They hunted and gathered small game, pine nuts, juniper beads, roots, and some insects. They crafted temporary shelters from branches and seeds. Between the southwestern peoples. In the southwest region, descendants of the ancient Puebloans formed the Hopi, the Acoma, the Zuni, and other peoples. Farming was central to their cultures, with maize serving as their basic food source. They built their homes from dry mud bricks called adobe. They also used irrigation to grow beans, squash, melon, pumpkins, and fruit. Their trade network spread through the Southwest and into Mexico. The Apache and the Navajo settled in the Southwest region about 1,000 years ago. These new groups were primarily hunters and gatherers. In time, the Navajo settled in villages and built square houses called hogans. They also began to grow maize and beans, and they were raised sheep as well. Plains people. The people of the Great Plains were nomadic. Their villages were temporary, lasting only for a growing season or two. The women planted maize, squash, and beans. The men hunted antelope, deer, and buffalo. When the people moved from place to place, they dragged their homes, cone-shaped skin tents called teepees, behind them. Buffalo were central to the lives of the people of the plains. Native Americans used buffalo to supply many basic needs. Buffalo meat was a good source of food, and people used the bones to make tools and weapons. Buffalo skins provided shelter and clothing. Today, many people associate Native Americans of the plains with the use of horses. These animals would transform plains life, but not until the 1600s after the arrival from Europe. Eastern people. Complex societies existed in the woodlands of eastern North America. A similar language connected the many Algonquin groups. The Cherokee and Iroquois had formal law codes and formed federations or agreements among different groups to join together. We're almost finishing the end. The Iroquois lived near Canada and in what is now northern New York State. The original 5 groups, Iroquois groups or nations, were the Onondaga, the Seneca, the Mohawk, the Oneida, and the Cayuga. These groups often warred with each other. Then in the 1500s, they established the Great Peace, which is an alliance called the Iroquois League. According to an Iroquoian tradition, this tribal elder and a chief of the Mohawk named Hiawatha founded the League. Worried that war was tearing the nations apart, they argued the people to unite the spirit of the friendship and peace. The 5 nations agreed to the great binding law, an oral constitution that defined how the League worked and established the Grand Council. This group of leaders met regularly to settle disputes among the various people. So there's its own political group keeping in charge. Although Grand Council members were men, women played an important part in choosing delegates to the council. The different members of the Iroquois Leagues were organized according to clans or groups or related families. The women in each clan chose a clan mother. These clan mothers then chose the male member of the Grand Council. The Tuscarora people joined the League in 1715. With their addition, the 5 nations became 6. Last one, the southern people. The southeast was also a woodlands area, but with a warmer climate than the eastern woodlands. Among the Native American groups of the Southwest were Creek, Cherokee, and Chickasaw. Farming was essential for each of these groups. The Greek lived in loosely knit farming communities in which is now Georgia and Alabama. They grew corn, squash, tobacco, and other crops. The Cherokee farmed in the mountains of what is now Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. The Chickasaw spread out across the southeast, but most of their largest settlements were in present-day Mississippi. There they farmed the fertile river bottomlands. A changing world. In whichever part of North America they lived, Native Americans developed rich and various cultures and ways of living that were suitable to their environment. And that is the most important key of all of it, that their culture and their adaptations to the environment that they lived in helped them survive. In the 1500s, however, a new people with vastly different cultures and ways of life would arrive to the America, which is the Europeans. This is one of the questions on your final. Their arrival changed. The arrival of the Europeans would change the Native Americans' world forever. Who changed the Native Americans' world? The Europeans. And that is the end of the reading for today.